What is and is not a traditional way to train? That is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. So I've talked about topics similar to this from time to time. It's something that crops up for various reasons, and maybe I'll talk about it with a different angle from time to time. So I hope what I have to say about it this time is maybe useful or interesting to you. It often crops up when, I've had conversations with people, and there seem to be a significant number of people out there who have decided that their way of training is the way, and anything else is incorrect or not traditional. And so they'll like to say, well, this isn't the traditional way of doing it, or that's not the traditional way of doing it, because they think that they know and theirs is the only right way. And I find this quite bemusing in many ways, because generally people who have this kind of attitude, they think they know a lot. Again, they think they're kind of the authority on what's right and what's not right about different practices. But the only way, really, that you can have that kind of attitude is by not knowing very much, generally, in my experience. And generally from these people, what I see is that they have learnt one particular way of doing things, and they've focused so much on that, and they've kind of been blinkered to actually seeing any of the many other ways of doing things, the many other variations of practice that exist. And because of this, they've developed this really strong opinion, and maybe their teacher has ingrained into them, this is the right way, everyone else is wrong. And so they've just decided that's the gospel truth. And so they then go out into the world and they want to tell everyone about how they're right and everyone else is wrong. And I was talking about something relating to this with one of the students on one of the courses recently. Actually, it wasn't in one of the courses. I think it was in our instructor community where we were having a Q&A. And someone made reference to, they had seen someone make reference to that this particular type of practice was not part of Qigong. And it was a very simple type of practice, very, very simple, which certainly historically has been part of Qigong. And again, like hearing someone with this kind of opinion, it's like kind of bemusing. It's like, how do they get to this point where they think that they know what is and what is not part of Qigong? Do they have no idea of just how diverse Qigong is, with literally thousands of different styles, and within those styles a multitude of different practices, different practitioners, both modern and ancient, who each have their different approaches, their different focuses, their different ways of doing things, all of which are certainly Qigong. And I think someone like this almost certainly has never visited mainland China, for example, and gone to the parks early in the morning when people are out doing their practices. Now, unfortunately, in recent times, the last couple of times I've visited China, there hasn't been as much of this on display, and I won't go into all the political and social reasons of why that might be. I hope that turns around and we start to see more of this again in the future. But certainly, longer ago, previously, when I visited China various times, when you go to those parks, particularly the big ones, you will often see many, many different groups and individuals all doing their different practices, all coming from different traditions that have fed into these practices. And wow, the diversity. Every 5 minutes for someone who thinks they know the one way to do things, the one way that is traditional, their mind would be being blown every 5 minutes as they walk around another corner and go, wow, look at what that person's doing. Haven't seen anyone do that before. And yet it is traditional. It has its own roots, and it's developed in Qigong has developed in these myriad different ways. And this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, certainly there are types of training or types of practices that are more common than others. We can certainly say that. But to say whether something is traditional or not, that is much harder to be able to say with any kind of definitive clarity, because there is just far too much diversity. There's no way you could possibly know. And if you have researched and gone into some of the older texts and writings and the scholarly writings and so on, again, wow, the level of diversity presented within those is quite remarkable. Often within those writings, they've tried to narrow it down and to group things into categories, say, well, from all of this diversity, we can have this category and that category and that category. But then within that, there's so many different variations. Anyway, I've probably gone on about that enough. I guess moving on to another aspect of this topic is, okay, so it's going to be hard to say whether something is traditional or not, although some things we certainly could say, like it's not traditional to perhaps use a video to follow when you're learning a practice. But is that a good or a bad thing? You know, of course, it would be nice to be able to do everything in person with someone when you're training every time. But even if you look back at previously at what was common for how people practiced, it was often actually very common for someone to go to their teacher and in person learn some movements, try to remember them, and then go away for sometimes months, sometimes even maybe a year at a time, practice them by themselves with nothing to refer to, maybe their own handwritten notes or a few diagrams to help remind them. But other than that, just practice the best they could and then come back to their master or teacher to have them review what they're doing and you know, maybe fine tune it and maybe teach them some more. I mean, there's a certain beauty to that approach, but isn't it more useful to have a reference that you can look at whenever you like to be able to review details and practice from? That's a good thing, isn't it? It's certainly not traditional, but it's good and it's useful. So why even if we were to know what is traditional and not traditional, why would that be important to us? You know, I can think for some reasons why it might be important, and it goes down to what is your motivation for training in the first place. And if you see the practices as maybe primarily a cultural tradition to be preserved and copied and passed down, well, in that case, it being traditional or not might be quite important to you because you specifically want to maintain how exactly it was done. And I think there's some value to that. There's a certain context where there's value in that. But there's also a real risk in that as well, because we will never be able to do things in exactly the same way as previous generations, because so many other aspects of our lives are different. And we also won't necessarily understand things the same way that they did. And so therefore we end up with a common way to describe this is Chinese whispers, where even though we're trying to copy it the same way, we're changing it. And so we think we're doing the traditional thing, but it ends up changing anyway. So it's kind of a folly, I think, in some ways to focus too much on that. Although I do respect the desire to preserve culture and that information, I think probably a more valuable way to do that is in creating good documentation, because that then remains consistent and stable. We don't have the Chinese whispers effect of change within that. So whether it be written, whether it be photographs, whether it be videos as a way to document, and then we go, yeah, we know how that was. Isn't this interesting? We can preserve this and pass that on. We might use that as part of our practice, but you know, the preservation is done through documentation primarily. Certainly that seems like a better approach to me. On the other hand, if our motivation for training is about understanding the essence of the practice, getting the true value of the practice, then tradition probably isn't so important. There might be value in recognizing and studying tradition, because by doing that, it can help us to discover aspects of the essence. But just following that tradition isn't the thing of value. It's the discovery of the essence that is of value to us. And when we have that essence, it then is most beneficial to us to apply it in the way that is most relevant to us in our lives now, which might mean not doing things in quite the way that they were previously, because again, so many other aspects of our environment, our day-to-day life and experience is different. And so we do it the best way that applies to us now. And that is the true traditional way. The people who are doing these practices hundreds of years, even thousands of years, were generally doing it because it worked for them, because there was something of value to them within it. And so they applied it to their lives the best way they could at that time. It wasn't so much about copying what someone did before just for the sake of copying, perhaps copying them again to get the essence, to get the value from it. And I think that is the way that we best honor tradition, that we best honor the knowledge that people have developed who have gone before us, is by finding the essence, seeking for the principles that lie below the practices, and then applying them in the best way that we can to our lives now. So anyway, that was my little thought for today. To sum it up, if we're looking at, what practices are traditional or not traditional, 1, how would you even know? Were you there hundreds of years ago? You can't know exactly how things were done traditionally. You might have some indications, but there's so many ways that it might not be what you thought. And so naturally we have to just do our best today. 2, is it even really important for you to specifically do what is traditional versus non-traditional? Or is it of more value to discover the principles and apply them in the way that's most relevant to you today, which may conform with how things were done previously, or may actually be quite different today. And by doing that, you're actually honoring, in the big sense, the tradition more effectively, more fully. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the vlog. If so, please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those good things, and I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.